But that's because you've always associated performance with feeling shitty, which is kind of funny. When did that happen, by the way?
I have no clue.
Yeah.
It just naturally gained that
ability.
Yeah. It's like my superpower. I'm really good at performing at a high level while feeling extremely shitty.
Could you imagine? Like that kills me. It's like, what's your superpower?
Yeah. I can still dunk a basketball even when I feel like shit.
Yeah, that's your superpower.
Welcome back to Past Your Prime, the podcast for active adults balancing training, rehab, family, and real life. I am Alex Kiker, pro volleyball player, working dad, and part-time injury collector, joined by Craig Smith, physical therapist, coach, life professional, and the guy who can explain a flare-up using a whiteboard, a coffee mug, and a shoehorn. Feet obsessed, Craig over here. Anyway, today we're getting into something Craig calls the recurrent injury problem, which is also my nickname. Not the big injury, but the first one. We were just talking about my first injury. No, my first injury was the shoulder, not the calf.
It was the shoulder.
Yeah, the shoulder was how I met you and how we're sitting here today now.
Which is funny because you just said, literally before we started recording, you said that you don't have a recurrent injury problem. That shoulder, the reason you say that is because sometimes you have a loose relationship with reality when it comes to pain and your shoulder.
Yeah, I don't experience either.
I mean, the amount of times you've had shoulder pain, you're like, I don't have a single injury that causes any of my problems. Clearly not true. Anyway, continue. I don't want to derail you.
It's all right. We're talking about the first injury that seems small until it quietly changes everything about how your body handles load, reacts to stress, and sets you up for the classic repeat flare cycle, which I guess I'm kind of in, but I don't necessarily agree with because I don't feel pain. If you've ever wondered why you used to lift heavy, run fast, or play hard without thinking, and now one tweak sends you into a spiral, this episode is going to make things make sense. Are you ready to break it down?
I'm ready to break it down.
Are you ready?
Yes.
For the tens and tens of viewers around the world.
We have a lot more than that now.
And the one in Costa Rica.
I thought it was London.
It's UK.
It is UK.
I think 3% of our viewers are in the UK.
It's definitely international now.
Okay, so what actually happens after that first minor injury? And let's always try and relate it back to my first minor injury, which was a labral tear.
To your shoulder.
To my shoulder.
And let's be honest, you probably did have shoulder pain before that.
Well, yes. I think I referenced it a couple episodes ago. That was 36 sets of volleyball in 3 days.
And that's where it took it over the edge. But before that, are you saying you did not have any shoulder pain?
I probably did.
Yeah, you absolutely had shoulder pain. Yeah. Okay. What I often think happens, and this actually came as a conversation with my coaching team earlier this week. We were really just kind of going through this. I mean, it is an incredibly common problem where someone will come in, and when they come in, they'll say, I had this minor tweak in my back when I was deadlifting. Didn't even feel like it was painful, but once it happened, my back kind of felt a little stiff afterwards. And, I went a little lighter on the rest of my exercises. I go home. I feel like I fully recovered. I maybe went a little bit lighter the whole rest of the week. And then when they do the deadlift again, they have a much larger, much more negative response. And when that negative response happens, then they go, okay, I'm gonna shut it down for a couple of weeks. And then it seems like it almost could disappear for a period of time. And then they have another major significant flare up. Yeah. And so it's one of these things where it seems minor, but something happened that made the wheels come off to where now the deadlift is an exercise they never want to do again, or even a variant of any deadlift would be any lower extremity hinging, that they don't want to actually do the activity anymore. It's a really common problem. And it's so common that most individuals, when we first talk with them, they'll only remember the major event. They won't remember preceding the 36 sets that you did, that, hey, I was having shoulder pain over the course of 2 or 3 seasons. And then I started to notice I started to do my abuse of Tiger Balm, which I remember this time.
Thank you for remembering.
Yes.
Yeah, that made me very upset.
Yes. The Tiger Balm was actually an issue much, or it preceded actually the major event that happened.
Right.
And I think it's really critical to understand that that is really common. And what happened was you had a tissue capacity collapse. And when you have that happen, it makes a whole bunch of things occur that are happening in the background before you have that severe, horrible experience where you can't actually be active anymore.
It also, I don't know, it might be slightly off topic, but it makes me think of that kinetic chain we've talked about before, because given my recent elbow injuries, I've been focusing more on shoulders and exercises that don't piss my elbow off. But I've noticed now that, like, okay, 6 weeks into this kind of quasi elbow rehab program, my shoulders are getting stronger. And I don't think that my elbows can handle how strong my shoulders have gotten. So like I'm swinging harder, jumping higher, but now my elbow is starting to flare up again because I'm producing more power in my arm.
Physical capacity always develops faster than tissue capacity, which is definitely an aspect of this that I want to hit at the end.
Okay.
Because it is such a common problem. But the other interesting part with the kinetic chain, which is one of the reasons why I think some of these minor injuries then develop into huge problems, is that our body is built to be able to compensate regionally for issues locally. So if you have a local injury to your shoulder, you're going to compensate by doing things to take stress off the shoulder. You're going to use maybe more elbow, a little bit more hand. You'll cut range of motion short. You'll do all sorts of things to basically avoid overdoing it on the shoulder. Those types of things you do without even thinking about. They're not really volitional. Like the most common one we see is with runners. Runners will often lose their force absorption chain. I think it often starts with the quad. They'll then shift where load actually has to happen to multiple areas in the lower extremity chain, from your glute, quad, calf, pretibials, glute max. Like you want to be able to get absorption from all of them. Eventually your body can't compensate enough. And then at that point, it really derails.
Yeah, that really makes sense, because my wrist has been hurting more recently too. And I think it just like at the top of my kinetic chain, I'm producing quite a bit more power just from 6 weeks of consistent training in that area. And then, just like radiating all the way down the rest of my arm is not strong enough to handle those loads.
It's not handled, and I can't handle it. And I think one of the ways to visualize it, because I always like to have my hands out to do this, is that initially, if you're feeling good and you're starting to train, this is most individuals. If you're not starting to train first because you got hurt, but you're just training for performance, what happens is people will start to train, and the tissue capacity, energy capacity, and physical capacity, they all match, right? You have a minor injury, and what happens is the tissue capacity dips slightly below physical capacity, but you still keep training at physical capacity level at the exact same level typically. And you make an assumption that they come back together, and they don't always do that.
Right.
And so once it goes down, now you have whatever this gap is, those are now triggers. Those are things that actually can reduce tissue capacity further. You do that over and over and over again. Over time, that gap actually becomes very substantial, even if you have no major event.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep that gap as close as possible right now. I've been training nowhere close to my physical capacity, but I'm seeing gains. Like I'm probably jumping the highest I have in 2 or 3 years, which kind of surprises me because I haven't been hitting anything extremely hard. And then, just spiking volleyballs is starting to hurt more just in my right arm. And it probably is those hidden triggers we talked about, which I think segues nice into the next question. So why does my trigger list keep growing from sleeping to spiking volleyballs to the way I sit?
I think the biggest part just to remember is when we talk about a trigger list, a trigger is just something that reduces your tissue capacity. And oftentimes we know it's a trigger because it actually causes pain or causes an increase in tightness, increase in some level of symptoms. What I actually think happens is, as I said, that gap gets bigger. Everything that's inside that gap between your physical capacity and tissue capacity has the potential to become a trigger. So it becomes a loop. So for example, I think let's use body weight let's use squats as an example. Say you're typically working out at a load of 225 pounds. Like that's your max where you're doing your loading so that you can get a good positive response. What happens after that irritation to tissue capacity is now, let's say anything above 200 pounds will actually cause you to have symptoms and lower your tissue capacity. And you do that once. And now you have another minor setback. Now it's anything over 180 pounds. And then you have another set down. Now it's everything over 150. Okay, well, now it's everything over 135. If you don't rebuild tissue capacity, it seems to be progressive how much you can handle without actually hurting yourself. And so you're gonna find that over time, getting out of bed, going against gravity, like those are things that are actually going to be potentially irritating, especially if you feel like a clinical lumbar instability. Like there's these things that just allow you to hurt yourself easier and easier and easier. And so, yeah, the trigger list grows because your tissue capacity drops.
That makes me a little bit nervous because I'm in, I would say, a little bit of a deload phase. Like we built my program, I want to say like 5 or 6 weeks ago, and I've been very consistent, just sticking to the upper body workout and the lower body workout. But lower body, I've only been doing like 50-pound sandbag, Zercher style squats. Mm-hmm. So like some drop squat variations, some box squat variations. So just different variations of the Zercher. And so I want to go into another slightly heavier squat loading phase. So I'm nervous that I might fall into this little doom loop again.
You would be extremely at risk for happening. And again, if you don't understand this concept of like when you add your load back in, you're adding your load back in at a much reduced rate. Because remember, physical capacity will come back so super fast, and it'll feel very easy, and you'll feel like you're under training, which you're not. You're not under training, and this is where the whole key concept of which capacity is the biggest limit. You have to be really clear on it, because if you're not clear on it, you're just going to basically push yourself back into this capacity issue.
And I don't want to do that.
You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that.
Where did the treatments end up going wrong in this? Because I feel like I've been pretty good on my treatments, staying consistent, not overly pushing myself, which we know is my problem, is that I always need to continue to push. But where am I at most and other folks at risk of going wrong?
I think the number one problem is people don't understand that to rebuild tissue capacity, you have to do more than just have the perfect treatment, right? Like, so the biggest idea, somebody will come in and everyone asks for, well, I just need an exercise, or I just want some stretches that you could teach me so I could just start to do those. That is built on a premise that the only thing that's missing out of the equation for you to be healthy is some perfect treatment, something that you just don't even realize is there, some cream you could rub on your body, I don't know.
Or some balm.
But that's actually not how it typically works, especially if it's a recurrent injury. If it's something where you had an injury and it's happened more than once, and you're starting to find that more and more things are now causing you more and more symptoms, in most cases, it's not going to be a single treatment that lifts you out of it. And like we've talked about before, if you're missing a therapeutic gap, which a therapeutic gap is just the treatments that improve tissue capacity are greater than the triggers that take it away. And that gap between them is how quickly you can build tissue capacity. In our minds, what that looks like is that's tissue healing. That's your tissue being able to handle more stresses without having a bad response. That's really what we're looking for. Unfortunately, most people have a idea, and I think that our healthcare system is built around this idea of procedures. Let the practitioner do something to you, instead of, hey, let me just make sure cohesively and holistically that you're not accidentally making yourself worse all the time. I've used the example before of like, if you have a finger that's really hurting you and it's because you jammed your knuckle, we could do traction, we could do soft tissue massage, we could do all these different things to make it feel better. But if you stick your finger in the door 10 times a day and slam it as hard as you can, it's not going to get better. It's going to stay terrible.
Really?
It's going to stay terrible.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's no such treatment that's actually going to overcome that problem. I think that's one of the biggest issues that people run into. But specifically on treatments, like if I had to lay out like what is the biggest issue with treatments, there's two problems. The first one is that you have these things that mask themselves as treatments that you actually think are treatments that are not treatments. Once again, treatments are things that improve tissue capacity. And so you can have things that reduce pain, but don't actually build capacity. And that to me is a false therapeutic, because it really makes you think, oh, I'm doing the right thing for my body because it feels better right now. That is a huge mistake, and it's rampant. The other thing are things that are called symptom maskers. And those are things they mask your pain experience, but they do nothing else besides that. And in those situations, the biggest issue with those is that they allow you to do triggering activities at a higher intensity, right?
Love those.
Right? So that's
big fan of those.
You are a fan of those. That's a Tiger Balm. That's an ibuprofen. In themselves, there's nothing wrong with them, right? Like, and I actually like them because sometimes what happens with pain, and we have people like this all the time, they don't want to take like opiates. They don't want to take pain
Or they
medication.
just stop doing their activity, which I think you don't like at all.
No, like, because that's also a trap. Like that's 100% a trap, because if you completely disuse your tissues, they're going to also handle less. You have to provide a certain level of tension to prevent the tissue capacity from completely dropping.
Right.
I mean, like we won't get into it today, but the research on bed rest is unbelievable. The research on immobilization, like where you can lose a quarter of your muscle in 2 to 4 weeks if you completely unload it. It is terrifying. So that's also not what I'm saying, but there are opportunities to use those types of tools. But what I often see happens is people will take the sign of pain relief as a sign that the tissue capacity is back when it's not. And so just being really clear, because they can totally be used. I don't think false therapeutics should ever be used. And symptom maskers can be used really well to help with recovery, to make sure that you're sleeping well, to help with all these other aspects that help with just general health. I think those are great. But it's when you match those with triggering activities because you think that's actually healing you, and it's not.
Yeah. And being strategic about them, right?
Yes.
Like I try to only use those things when I'm doing the highest level of activity. Anything else, I can, either deal with the pain or try and reduce the pain through whatever activity I'm doing. But yeah, using the ibuprofen, I've been off the Tiger Balm for a long time now, but I kind of want to bring it back, but I'll hold off as long as I can.
Why do you want to bring it back?
It just feels good.
Yeah.
Have you ever used it?
I don't like stuff like that.
Have you ever used Tiger Balm specifically, though?
No, I have not.
Okay. We'll rub some on you next episode.
We are not going to rub any. We have a film of me getting rubbed with Tiger Balm that probably would do very well.
I agree.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
But going back to one of your first points, you had mentioned people coming in and asking you for specific stretches. Do you just kick those folks out of the clinic? Actually, you can leave.
I do think it's funny enough now that I will have, I'll have, if I'm in like a coach retreat and somebody says that, like my team will look at me like, can you believe this person said that?
They asked for stretching. Like, I've got an episode of Past Your Prime for you. We're going to have you sit here and watch this for the rest of the appointment.
Yeah. If you're a stretcher, I don't mean anything negative. I just don't think as a therapy or as a treatment that it's that useful. I think it's the number one most overrated activity you can do.
That's why I don't do it and judge everybody at the gym when they are now. See you doing your leg swings and your toe touching. And I'm like, you shouldn't be doing that because Craig told me.
Why do you think it's kind of funny that I've been doing this stuff? We were playing around on YouTube, and for some reason I'm in the algorithm for this guy who is incredibly mobile. And at some point I want to get a whole bunch of his videos together and just talk through the insane stuff he says. Yeah, I think it's horrible advice. Horrible advice. Anyway. Okay. That would be my example of false therapeutic is most stretching.
Yeah. So that's a trap in itself. But let's go back to the time off trap that you had mentioned as well.
Well, the time off trap, the big thing to remember on that is that it's going to reduce symptoms. Like you probably will have less pain. You won't feel as tight. You're not doing the things that your body will think are dangerous. So the threat detector, which is your pain system, will not respond. The other part though is that when you take time off, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. When you're not loading tissue, your body needs that tension to keep the stuff that's there. If you stop using it, your muscle tissue will start to go down. So you won't get actual muscle protein synthesis. And when that happens, you're going to see that there's this basic collapse because you're still going to have muscle protein breakdown. You'll find that the tendons won't be as resilient. You'll see changes in your cardiovascular system. You see these like just dramatic changes if you're physically inactive or if you quit doing the activity. That's not what everybody's doing, but that's one of the reasons why, even though it's the number one recommendation is quit doing the activity, I don't like that. But from just a clinical perspective, anybody who's done physical therapy for a really long time or managed a lot of complex rehabs, you always catch new injuries when you get to where we call it capacity progression. But when you start to progress somebody through more and more activity, you always catch injuries, especially if somebody has taken a ton of time off and they've quit doing the activity. Like somebody hurt their knee, they had a traumatic synovitis, they develop a patellar tendinopathy. Or somebody hurt their heel, they'll develop Achilles tendinopathies when they try to go back to running because your body catabolized or broke down those tissues.
And it seems like it gets worse, honestly, after rest. I was just out with somebody this weekend that's had like a forearm injury for who knows how long. They said they, rested for a month and came back and it was worse when they loaded it again.
Yeah.
And I think it's like you need that consistent loading to continue to build that tissue capacity. Hopefully you're being smart about it and opening your therapeutic gap at the same time, but rest is not going to fix it. In most cases, it's just going to make it worse.
Well, and if you think of it, your friend probably only took away obvious triggers.
Right.
They probably didn't dig through the hidden triggers that don't. The funny thing about hidden triggers, things that you don't realize are actually lowering your tissue capacity, but they are, is that they may not be symptomatic at all at the time, and you probably do them all the time. Like, so for somebody with like grip pain or forearm pain, one of the most common ones is that they overgrip all the time. They just don't realize they're grabbing things.
Which now that I think about it, the activity we were doing was axe throwing.
And he's like, this kind of hurts or what? Yeah. So he's doing things that's actually hilarious.
I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So that's the whole thing is like, well, this thing hurt, but I'm not actually taking out all the things, which would make some level of sense. I'm only taking out this main thing. And so in that situation, of course, it's not going to be better. The one that we run into all the time is people trying to do pull-ups. Like they'll get forearm pain when they start to do pull-ups and then they stop and then try to come back to it and then they stop. Whereas it just break down, why is a pull-up really hard in your grip? Well, it's because you're in a pronated position. You're shortening certain muscle groups, your flexors. And so you're put in this active insufficient position so that when it activates, it's just really hard on it. So let's still load it, but let's load it to where it's not symptomatic. And that's what we call a rehab standard, where you're not overloading your tissue capacity versus just not doing pull-ups. Like that's never going to solve the solution. Or you can do something like we talked about in the last episode. You're going to do an artificial capacity stabilizer. So you could put something on your forearm so it artificially increases your tissue capacity so it can handle the loads that you're putting through it. Those make way more sense than going, I'm taking 8 weeks off of using my forearm, but at the same time, I'm also going to trigger it without realizing it all the time. You're never going to heal that way. You're just going to lose tissue capacity. And then you're going to be 2 months from now, more deconditioned, still feel shitty, not be better.
You're making me feel bad because I have not done pull-ups for about 3 months now, given all of my upper extremity injuries.
But you have been doing ISOs.
I've been doing some ISOs.
Yeah, so that's not complete unloading. Like when I'm saying so I actually think you've done a really good job. But I think it's always funny when we talk about this because you have done a good job. There's a reason why you're still performing at a very high level. It's why you're doing the right stuff. The fact that it
just doesn't feel.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
But that's because you've always associated performance with feeling shitty, which is kind of funny. When did that happen, by the way?
I have no clue.
Yeah.
It just naturally gained that
ability.
Yeah. It's like my superpower. I'm really good at performing at a high level while feeling extremely shitty.
Could you imagine? Like that kills me. It's like, what's your superpower?
Yeah. I can still dunk a basketball even when I feel like shit.
Yeah, that's your superpower. Oh my God. Did that answer? You feel like I covered that?
Yeah, I think that's good. But that just what we were talking about, how does that physical and tissue capacity get out of sync? Either specifically with me or
I think the most important part to remember is physical capacity builds faster than tissue capacity. So not only do you have a mismatch, but the rate of return is different, which it's always interesting to me. And it's kind of funny. So when I'll get high school or college age people who are looking to make the next jump, either from competing at a high school local level to maybe regional, getting into college, looking to go pro, just a whole bunch of different jumps. And my brain always goes to most individuals, if they get to that point, then making it to the next level, it's typically not because they're not athletic enough. It's not because they don't have the physical capacity. it's almost always because they can't get large windows of training where they don't get hurt. I mean, that's almost always what happens. And that's because the people who get to that level, they enjoy the activity. They're highly motivated. They're developing these like really good skills. They have all the things going in the right direction from a physical capacity standpoint. And so when they come and talk to me about developing a whole program, let's do a whole bunch of stuff around sport specific training. It's like, I don't really think you need that for me. I think what you need is to be able to maintain your tissue capacity and energy capacity equal to your growing physical capacity.
What you really need is to be able to bear crawl four lengths of a basketball court.
And that's all you have to do.
That's all you have to do. That's what helped me make the jump.
I love how you always call me out on that. But we didn't have the equipment, but it did work. So
it did work. Yeah, it got me to the next level. So if you want to get to the next level, hit up Craig at smithperformancecenter and he'll get you to that next level.
We have gotten a little bit more sophisticated than bear crawls. I do appreciate that.
Yeah,
but yeah.
He has some gear. And it looks like he's got some new gear out there too.
Yeah, we do.
New benches, because those benches he's been using for 10 years.
No, 5 years.
5 years?
Maybe 7.
Yeah.
Maybe 7.
They're falling apart though.
They aren't falling apart. It's we got them because we got ones that are vertical.
Yes.
They are those ones we got are tanks that will run stuff over. But it's not good when you have limited space. So it's more space storage. But what I was saying on that though is like with physical capacity, just remember the rate's different. And so like if you're looking to get back and not basically be able to manage these like minor injuries that become big issues, the last thing beyond just building your tissue capacity back up is just remember you're going to be able to progress physically. Like things are going to feel easier than what your tissue can actually handle. And so if you don't have like a good key sign, a good feedback loop that tells you're doing too much, you're going to run past how quickly your tissue capacity develops. And that's such a common problem that it's one of the biggest issues. It's one of the reasons why when somebody is doing like a buildup, it's why their body stops being able to handle the stress. It's why like in marathon training, you start to catch injuries at the end of the training cycle. But it's also why like the first part of like a training season is where you get the most injuries. Like there's all these things that are like we see all the time that I think is really explained well by tissue capacity developing slower than physical capacity.
So do I do pull-ups now or do I not do pull-ups
We will talk about that off air. Oh my God. Yes, you can do pull-ups once you have full range of motion with your elbow and feel pain-free. But if you can hold your body weight in a neutral position with no symptoms, that's totally fine to start with.
So just a hang?
A hang.
All right.
A hang, but you can't hang with your elbow completely extended because that's symptomatic for you. So you'd have to hang with it bent. Slightly bent. And it has to be symptom-free. But if it's not symptom-free, then no, you can't.
Okay. Thank you for answering my questions.
Yes, you're welcome.
Okay. Is there anything else to hit about minor injuries and being in your tweak spiral?
No, I think the biggest part is just to understand this concept is the first concept, in my opinion, for those people who really feel like they're in this space where you're motivated to train, you're motivated to be physically active, but every time you try to, an old injury keeps on creeping back in and throwing everything off. I think it's also really important for those people who have looked at specific exercises like the squat or the deadlift or the bench press and said, I can't do this anymore. There's a reason why you feel that way, and that reason can be actually addressed. It just may take much longer than what you realize. And then to also understand that there isn't some like perfect treatment out there.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist. And that's the part that I think often happens with like the injections, the surgeries, that whole idea is that these treatments are unbelievable. They fix all your problems. I mean, there's a reason why we have a rotator cuff tears, why even when you have surgery on them, they re-tear at a really high rate. Same thing with microdiscectomies for a disc. They often reherniate. There's a reason why like we look at like PRP long-term studies on it. There's a reason why it doesn't seem like it does that much.
Well, because it increases your physical and temporarily your tissue capacity, yes. But then people don't do the therapies to go with those things. And that's where I feel like I've been strategic through my cortisone injection and other little things that I've been doing is like, okay, I'm going to really focus on getting myself pain-free and building the tissue capacity so that when I do decide to progress again, I'll probably just get injured again. But like I've done everything right in advance of that. to try and build myself up to the highest capacity as
and
possible.
your tissue capacity will not collapse because of it.
Right.
That's like when somebody asks me about a specific treatment, I don't care. I actually don't really care what treatments people do because it doesn't, I'll rehab them all because that's not my job is not to provide a treatment. My job is to build your tissue capacity and to make sure that it links well with your physical capacity and to stay active as long as you possibly can. I'm so agnostic to whatever treatments people want to do as long as they're actually treatments. So I love when people do PRP when it's appropriate and when they've created an environment and they have an understanding of what they're going to be doing so that they don't constantly re-trigger it. Yeah. But how often, I mean, you wouldn't believe how many times we catch people in cortisone doom loops where they don't even realize that the cortisone is actually reducing their ability to actually heal. And it's not that I dislike cortisone. It's just I don't think they're doing it in a thoughtful process. And like that's so common. The peptides are the exact same way. There's this whole treatments. There's so many treatments. There's like an endless amount of treatments, but it has to be within a plan, especially if it's a recurrent injury.
If you've ever wondered why one injury suddenly turned you into someone who's always managing something, sounds like this is the reason. Your body didn't betray you, but your timeline did. That's where I'm stuck at right now. I feel like my 3 months off of upper body things is like being betrayed internally.
It's not off though. You're not off. You're doing stuff.
I'm doing the things right, but it just doesn't feel right because my brain works backwards. It sounds like physical capacity progresses at a much quicker rate than your tissue capacity. And it seems like maybe even 3 months of building tissue capacity is not enough, at least for me. But if you don't rebuild both, you get stuck in the doom loop. Don't get stuck in the doom loop. If you've got a injury-specific pattern you want us to break down, shoot us a message over at team@pastyourprime.com. You can also DM us at pastyourprimepod on Instagram.
Mean? What is DM?
I think that's a direct message.
Interesting.
I could be wrong on that.
I've heard people say that, and now I realize that's what it means, and I think I thought it was something a lot more explicit.
Or a PM. I think that's a private message.
Oh, okay.
You can also just comment on a YouTube video. That would work. I think you can comment on Spotify and Apple.
Everything, yeah.
We don't really have great access to Apple, but we'll see it, I think.
Yeah.
I think we're on everywhere you can find a podcast. So follow us, preferably on all of them. You can rate us, but make sure you rate us high, 5 stars only. No 4s, 3s. And if it's a 2 or a 1, just you can hold your opinion.
Yeah, keep it to yourself.
Aside from that, I think we'll see you on the next episode.
PYP, baby.
Peace.